Well, this is a special pleasure. I have the honor of introducing you to one of our writing group, and this is the shining star of the writing group. And Iris has recently gotten a book published, and this is the book. The book is titled Wings of a Flying Tiger, and this is Iris Young. I am delighted to introduce her and to have her share her story with us, because the book, while it is a romantic novel, a historical romantic novel, it very much intertwines the pieces of her life. And so we're going to try to share both of those in the process. Fair enough?
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
It's delightful. So, Iris, how long did you work on this book?
The first draft actually took me 3 months, but I worked full-time. It took me another 2-3 years to rewrite.
So tell us a little about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in China, from a city called Wuhan.
Wuhan. Did I get that right?
Yes. It's a big industrial city between Beijing and Hong Kong.
So somewhere in the middle of China.
Yes.
And you were raised in communist China, right?
Yes.
And you also had very bright parents?
Both of them were professors.
Okay.
Biologists.
Right. And your aunt was a writer?
My grandma was a writer and a playwright. My aunt was a translator.
Okay. And your aunt translated Peter Pan?
Peter Pan, Jane Eyre, and Wuthering Heights.
Wuthering Heights,
and other classics
into Chinese.
Yes. She got her master's degree in Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you also came to this country as an adult. Mm-hmm. You already had a college degree, right?
Yes.
And you,
biology.
In biology?
Yes.
And your parents were both botanists?
Yes.
And so you went to school where?
Wuhan University, the same university. They were professors.
Okay, and when you came to this country, where did you go?
University of Rochester.
Okay,
very cold.
Very
cold place.
and what degree did you get?
I have a PhD in molecular biology.
Okay, so this is a very bright woman. Okay, she is also a very good writer, but she's a very bright woman, and as you can tell, and you'll see this from the discussion that we've had, she is a person who's made many transitions into this country, and the transitions are reflected in the book as well. So tell us a little bit about this story. Tell me about the historical context of this story.
Okay. The story starts in 1937 when Japan invaded China, invaded Nanking particularly, the capital of Republic of China. And in 6 weeks, they killed 300,000 Chinese, including disarmed soldiers, and raped over 20,000 women from age 8 to age 80. So that's why the event is called the Rape of Nanking. And my story starts there. My character, Jasmine Bai, she was a college student. She came back to Nanking trying to convince her parents to leave the city. Her parents were highly educated and they had education from Japan actually. So they thought naively that they were able to help. But Jasmine came back too late to save her parents, but in time to witness the horrors of the massacre. She survived the massacre because of a group of Westerners, mostly Americans.
Right.
That's why she had the hatred for the Japanese and the love for the Americans.
And she spoke English, as did her parents.
Yes.
As did your parents.
Yes.
All right. So we're talking about a very unusual character. This is a bright, educated, English-oriented, American-oriented, Western-oriented woman as the main character, as one of the main characters of this story. Mm-hmm. And in the process, you need to appreciate that Iris is also a very well-educated, from an educated family, English-oriented person. Now, you obviously have other interests as well. And your grandmother, your aunt, got a master's in Soviet Union?
No, my grandma she was the first Chinese woman to receive a master degrees from the UK.
Right, from the United Kingdom, right?
Right. My aunt got her master degree from Michigan in this country. My mom got her, not the master degree, just a regular BS degree from Soviet Union. Yeah.
So your family in the process of becoming very well educated, bright, scientifically and writing-oriented people have been all over the world, really, basically.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive. So,
thank you.
So you call this The Wings of a Flying Tiger. Tell me why.
Because this is a story about rescue of American pilot and the flying tiger.
Okay.
Right? When this flying tiger's wings, he was badly wounded. So when his wings was damaged, the Chinese people saved him, helped him. They were the wings of this flying tiger. That's why.
So just to share, I mean, first of all, one of the things that you might be interested to know, and this is another part of this process, in sharing our stories, I learned that both of us are pilots. And Iris is a pilot that learned to fly because she was terrified of heights. And I think it is a remarkable, this is a woman who faces her fears. And the characters that she writes about face their fears, and you can feel that in the story as well. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do. As a writer, you have to draw something from your own experience, even though it's a totally different time, different experience, but you get that sense from doing something different, right?
So it's a very intimate story, I mean, about these people and their experiences in the invasion of Japan, of China. And
it's more than that, because my mom and grandma left Nanking days before the massacre happened.
Oh, really?
They had a nice home in Nanking, and they left because they knew the invasion, and not everybody was so fortunate like them had a chance to leave the city, and they did. But her family and my father's family end up in Chongqing. As part of the story, Chongqing was bombed by the Japanese regularly. My father was only 4 years old at the time, and he still remember, he told me the sight and sound, the smell of the bombing, and he had nightmares for years. I think I shared he wet his bed as well.
Oh, yeah.
At one point, all their belongings were destroyed. They survived, but all the belongings were destroyed. So I also include that part in my story.
So both the experience in Nanking, the rape of Nanking, which is part of your family's story as well. I mean, they didn't experience the actual devastation of it, the destruction.
But they knew it's coming, and they left it.
And it was an intimate part of their lives because many, many people they knew were killed or had their lives destroyed.
Yeah.
And then, let's go to the American part of this, which is a fascinating part of it.
Yes.
And the Flying Tiger, people should note, is an American pilot, and he is an American pilot that is one of the Flying Tigers. And so share with me why we have an American pilot in a Chinese country before the Americans became part of World War II.
So this character, Danny Hardy, belonged to a group called the American Volunteer Group.
Right.
It was formed under President Roosevelt's executive order, and that was in spring 1941. You are right. America wasn't at war, yet. So the military pilots, U.S. military pilots, were secretly recruited to join this group, and 100 pilots plus 200 supporting members traveled to China, first to Burma and then to China with fake passports, and they were enlisted in the Chinese Air Force. It's really interesting is because those pilots were young and adventurous, but they had no combat experience. They were not even trained to fly P-40, the plane they were going to use. So the Japanese thought very little of the small group of inexperienced American pilots, because by then, Japan already fought China for many years. They had advanced aircraft and experienced pilots. But in 6 to 7 months, American volunteer group destroyed 296 Japanese aircraft and more than half tons of Japanese supplies. It was just amazing, fascinating experience.
So in the process of getting ready to talk with you about this, to share this with you, I looked at the Flying Tigers, and here they were, 100 pilots, volunteered, 3 squadrons, barely 60 planes working at any given time.
Right. They had 100 to start with, but even during training, they destroyed some of them.
And so there were planes shot down. There were planes that were destroyed on the ground. These guys, as you say, went up against pilots, Japanese pilots, that had 5-10 years of experience.
That's right.
And in the process, and not only that, and your story points this out, there were times when they were outnumbered 10 to 1.
That's right. That's right. Still, they won in the end. It's just amazing history. Fascinating.
So what Iris has done is she has mixed the historical aspects of the rape of Nanking and the overtaking of parts of China by the Japanese and the volunteers of the American pilots in the story.
That's right. The rape of Nanking part is because that shows my main character, she developed her hatred for the Japanese and her love for the Americans, because it's the group of small group of Westerners, mostly Americans. They formed an international safety zone in Nanking, which accommodated and saved 300,000 Chinese, half of the population.
Wow.
The other half were all killed.
Yeah. So basically, just the encircling of that part of the city saved half the population of Nanking?
Yeah.
Is that true?
It's an area of 2.5 square miles inside the city. Small part, yes. It was packed with people.
Yeah.
Every building, every room, every outside space were packed with people.
Wow. So your character, your American character, also has a flavor of Chinese.
Right.
Tell us about that.
He was born actually in China in a missionary family.
Okay.
He was very young before he left the country, but that kind of upbringing gave him a little fascination of this part of the country, this part of the world, because he also, when you're young, you have that kind of memory, right? Even though you cannot remember exactly what happened, you have that kind of feeling for the people, for the place. So he always wanted to go back to that part of the world and help the people over there.
So one of the questions I asked you earlier today was, obviously you made this character Sino-friendly, right? Chinese-friendly.
Sure.
And I asked you, were there real Flying Tiger pilots? Because we're talking about real pilots, real men who volunteered, who had backgrounds with historical interest in China.
That's true. I read somewhere that there's a pilot just like him.
Really?
Yeah, he grew up in China. He had that special feelings for Chinese. That's why he went back to China to fight for the people there.
So both of your two main characters, now we have this young, beautiful Chinese woman whose parents are very bright. She speaks English. She is college educated, right?
Right.
She's an artist. And she has had a romance with an American, correct?
Yes.
And he has had romances before he comes to China.
Even with Asian,
Chinese American women there.
Right.
So the two of them share some language crossover. They share interests in each other.
That's right.
And they're mutually attracted chemically in each other, right?
Sure, yes.
So it all fits perfectly, right? For a romance.
I think so.
Yeah, I think it does too. And I think, so you have this, how does this Chinese woman meet this American man?
Well, after the rape of Nanking, the Nanking massacre, she was able, with the help of American priests, she was able to go back to Chongqing, reunited with the uncle's family. But as we talked about, Chongqing was bombed by the Japanese regularly. During one of the bombing, the Japanese bombed the entrance of a tunnel. Thousands of people trapped inside this tunnel and suffocated to death, including another Jasmine's family member. So her uncle had enough. He decided, I'm going to send my daughter and my niece away to a small village in Yunnan province. It was supposed to be a safe haven. It was so remote that the Japanese shouldn't be there. They had no business to be there. But then in the summer of 1942, American pilots crashed into that area. And that's how their path.
So she actually met this pilot because he had parachuted out of the airplane.
That's right.
And was injured.
Badly injured.
And helped to bring him back.
Yes.
To help.
With the whole village.
Right. So you actually have multiple occasions where this war impacts first Nanking and then Chongqing and then perhaps
Yunnan province, yes.
The Yunnan province.
Yes.
And so you have taken the story of these flying tigers and followed their journey where they would have been in 1941 and 42 and mixed this historical novel in the process, correct?
Yes.
Very good.
Yes.
So would you like to share with us a little passage?
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay. I will read.
I've encouraged her to read to us, and the reason I say that is that it is the richness of the writing. It isn't just simply a historical novel. It isn't just simply, in effect, a historical romance, but it is also beautifully written about both the people that are there and the surroundings and the beauty of the area. So please share with us.
Okay, thank you. This is chapter 46. There are three characters in this part. Danny is the American pilot with a wounded leg and malaria. Birch is a Chinese pilot sent to help him, and Daisy is Birch's little sister. Okay. One look at that man's path, and Danny understood why Daisy did not want to take this route. The gorge was one of the deepest canyons in the world. Between sheer rocky cliffs, the two sides were connected by a narrow bridge made of rough wooden planks intertwined with ropes. It was no more than 20 yards, but it wasn't for anyone with a faint heart. One missed step would send someone down the deep gulch. The bridge was too narrow for two men to walk side by side, and was impossible for one to hop from one plank to another. Wasting no time, Birch bent down in front of Danny, and before the American could argue, Birch picked him up on his back. The 200-pound weight made him stumble. Sucking in a breath, he stabilized himself. Without turning, he shouted to Daisy, "Wait here, I'll be right back." At 5'10", Birch was tall for a Chinese, but Danny was 6'3", a heavy load. The primitive bridge was challenging for anyone to cross, but seemed like an insurmountable task to carry another person on one's back. Birch bent forward. His heart hammered, and his pulse quickened. The decayed boards and rotten ropes threatened to break at any moment. No matter how brave he was, he couldn't help but wonder if the old bridge could hold their combined weight. The planks creaked, and the bridge swayed under their weight. The springing movement brought a ripple of goosebumps onto Birch's skin. Below, he spotted a hawk. With several beats of his powerful wings, the bird drifted, swooped, and dove suddenly when its prey came into view. With a shrill cry, it disappeared into the fog above the river at the bottom of the gorge. The endless abyss took Birch's breath away, but he remained focused and pursued slowly. At one point, a piece of plank broke. He didn't see it happen, but he heard it. The snapping sound And then Dennis gasped. His heart sank. How big is the gap? Will it be trouble when I come back for Daisy? Sweat poured into his eyes, but he didn't have the time or free hand to wipe them clean. Only sheer determination propelled him forward. Halfway across, they heard yellings from a short distance away. It was in Japanese. Stop! Stop! Birch picked up the pace. Daisy had watched nervously as her brother navigated the bridge. So focused was she on her loved ones that she didn't hear the Japanese closing in from behind. They laughed and shouted at her, signaling her not to move. But Daisy broke into a frantic run and spun onto the bridge. It was too late. A couple of steps later, with a loud blast and a scream, the old bridge broke in the middle, cutting off the only escape route she had. Now she was separated from the two men she loved.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And this scene is at which river? Remember?
This is the made up. This is a made up river.
Okay.
Not the one.
But there are rivers like that.
Oh yeah, with deep gorge.
Right.
Yunnan province is a beautiful country. It's half of the country is plain, but the other half is tall mountains, and they have deep gorge just like this.
And there are rivers 1,000 miles long that go all the way from the Himalayas clear to
right.
Thailand, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so this picks up on that.
Mm-hmm. And I've been to Yunnan several times. I love that area. Yeah.
So how often do you get back to China?
Before my parents passed away, I went back to China almost every year to be with them, to go to places. But since they passed away in 2013, I haven't been back then. But before that, 2010, I actually went back to China to take care of my father and mother. My father was dying of cancer. So I quit my job at University of North Carolina and went back to China.
So you spent three years taking care of your father.
Right. Half a year for my father, but I stayed another 2.5 years just for my mom because she had stroke. She was half paralyzed.
Oh,
yeah.
So your famous botanist parents loved flowers.
Yes.
Especially your mother.
Yes. She's passionate about flowers.
So tell us about this book.
Okay. Well, since my mother loved flowers, after she had the stroke, my father and I took pictures for her, just for her to enjoy, because it's hard for her to go out easily. And for over 15 years, we took thousands of pictures for her to enjoy. I went to all kinds of botanical gardens or just wild flowers. Anywhere I see tiny little flowers, I would take picture. And for her, by the time my father was dying of cancer, one of the students suggests you should get a book out. I have to say, my mother during that years, she made slideshows using those pictures, putting scientific meanings behind it and send it to friends and families. That's how.
So they weren't just pretty pictures; they were botanical expressions.
Meanings, right? There are meanings behind
it. And she used her technical background.
That's right.
And your father also had a similar technical background.
Yes, but by then he already too ill to do anything.
Right.
So the first book, we used half of his pictures and half of my pictures. My mom wrote most of the books. I did a little editing. By the time the first book published, my mom saw the first book. Okay. But then we're in the process of doing the second one, and she passed away in the middle. So I used 95% of my picture and 5% of my father's picture. My mom wrote half the book. I finished half the book.
And this is the book that you each did half?
This is the second book. Okay. So
this book is in Chinese, right?
Both books are
Mandarin?
Mandarin. Both books are in Chinese, but every single flower has a scientific name.
Right.
Latin name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you showed them in both then, right?
Mm-hmm.
So part of the reason I brought that up, I mean, is apart from the fact that you're a molecular biologist with a PhD, right? And that your parents were both botanists, is the love of flowers floated over into your story.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Share that with us.
The main character's name is Jasmine.
Right.
The secondary character's name is Daisy. And my pen name is Iris. So I choose Iris as my pen name partly because my mom loved flower, particularly iris, but also because the author of The Rape of Nanking, her name is Iris Zhang. And her book is so important to my story. I learned so much from her book about the history of the rape of Nanking. I used those history and weaved into my own story. So to thank her, I chose Iris as my pen name.
And you also used a flower name for the little town.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Peach blossom. Right. Just because flower is so important to my family.
Right.
Right. So
it all fits. It weaves back in, and it fits both with the story and also your interest. So I asked you earlier to say something in Chinese.
Ni hao.
Ni hao.
Ni hao.
Got closer this time?
Yes, much better.
So the first time I heard this, being the classical good old boy from Montana, it sounded to me like yee-haw, which is a big rodeo horse adventure kind of response. Yee-haw! And it might be something that you would say at a kegger, right, if you were in college. But I was corrected.
Yeah, I told you
my pronunciation was not very good.
There's up and down. It's not that easy. Right?
Okay. All right. So you also have some other pilot characters in here. I mean, you have an earlier character early in the book, a guy named Jack. So what happens to Jack? Do you feel we should share that?
Yeah, he's Danny's best friend from the childhood. So as Danny, he's brave and strong and adventurous. He came to China because of Danny, because Danny's love of China. So he decided to join the American Volunteer Group. But in this book, he was killed after he parachuted out of his plane, and the Japanese killed him.
And there was actually an American pilot,
a real American
who had
pilot.
Exactly that same thing happen to him out of the Flying Tiger group.
Yes.
You know what? Oh, yeah. So you and I were talking about the fact that I shared with the folks that they better block out a block of time before they start reading it, because you can maybe get the first 20 or 30 pages into it and put it down. I don't think so, but you may be able to. But then you better block out time, and because it drives. I remember, just to share with you, I was a very dear friend of a guy named A.B. Guthrie, who was a famous author in Montana. And he wrote the book The Big Sky, after which Montana picked up the name.
Right.
And he and I were sharing one night Thomas Hardy's, we were talking about Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And it's a book from 100 years ago, but it has the same kind of, your book reminded me of this.
Oh my
because
God.
Bud and I talked about this, and he asked me if there was a book that I really felt powerful, and I said, yeah, it's Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And his eyes got big, and he said, wow, he says, I felt the same way.
Wow.
It drove right through you. You couldn't put it down. And I feel some of the same energy in your book.
Wow.
Much of that same energy.
It is funny because I heard so many people telling me that that they, even on Twitter, on Amazon, the people said that I couldn't put it down. I have to finish reading it. I'm just so grateful to hear that.
I think it does have that drive. And of course, part of the thing that is beautifully unique about this process is that the time period you're talking about is 8 or 9 months, something like that. 41 to 42, basically, is a period of a lot of huge changes in China at the time. And it drives that part, that historical aspect drove as hard as your book does, don't you think?
All those three big events in my book, the rape of Nanking, the Chongqing bombing, and the Flying Tiger, they were just history that it's unlike others. They're really unique kind of history in a different ways, but they're unique.
So let's talk a little bit about writing, because obviously you're not a natural English speaking or American writer.
That's right.
You've come from about as far away from it geographically.
Yes.
And personally as you could possibly come, right?
And training, yes.
So you kind of sort of knew English when you came here in your 20s, but it was mostly written English, right?
Most written English, plus really when I came here, there was a program between China and United States at the time. It was a very special, prestigious program in biological field. 50 students were chosen from the entire country of China to come to United States to join this program, come to the States. So I passed all kinds of exams and
so we're talking about we're talking about 1 billion people in China, and they pick 50. Roll those dice, okay? Right? How does that happen? So you were very bright.
I work hard. I always say I work hard.
Right. So then you got to come to the United States. You spoke a little English.
Poor English, very little knowledge of this country, and 500 borrowed US dollars from the government. 5 $100 bill, and I came to this country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and you talk about, and you've shared this with me in another setting, and you've actually done some writing about the fact that you weren't this gregarious, outward, engaging person at the time either, were you?
Right. It's because writing changed me. So
tell me, before you tell us how you changed you, tell me who you were before then, when you came here, energetically.
I was very shy, very fearful, almost afraid of pretty much anything and everything.
Yeah.
I was very closed, that kind of person.
So what gave you the courage to come to the United States?
That just to have a better life. I had that sense I could make a better living to go to.
Did you have a sense that you would return to China, or did you know?
Yes, actually at the time it was required.
All right, so you were this very bashful, self-conscious, terrified woman.
Yes, I was.
All that.
Yes, all that and more. I used to say I was the shyest person in the world.
Really?
The most fearful and shyest person in the world.
So you went through a period when you had a young child, right? And were married, and not happily married.
That's right.
And so what was it that you did that helped you through that process?
Yeah. Because I was shy and fearful and trapped in this unhappy marriage, I became more and more negative, and to a point I was depressed.
Yeah.
And I think I shared with you one time I just fold myself into a ball and sitting in a corner, and in my mind I watched myself hanging on the edge of a cliff.
Really?
Literally, I was hanging there and I cried for help and nobody helped me. So I was slipping down this cliff, and I had to make a decision whether really just to make myself fall, let it go, or somehow try to help myself, save myself out of that dangerous situation. And of course, luckily I decided I have to try my best to save myself. So I turned, as a bookworm, I turned books for help, and I read all kinds of self-help books. And while I was reading them, they all made sense, but when you put them down, the reality was still the same, and nothing changed. Until one day I came across a book. It says, if you write down 5 positive things a day, in 21 days, you'll be able to switch your mindset from a negative to a positive. Really,
so in 21 days you got off the cliff, right?
Sounded too good to be true, but hey, I had nothing to lose, so I was willing to try. Not 21 days.
It took more than that.
2 years.
Yeah, okay. So you're talking
Non-stop.
about 700 days, 750 days or so
Yep.
to get to a place.
Yes, consistently doing the same thing over and over.
5 positive things a day.
And I started by jotting down just 5 words or simple phrases, nothing complicated. But then in time, simple words became sentences, and then sentences became paragraphs, and then paragraphs turned into pages. And then in 2 years, I was able to really, just like the books that I switched my mindset. Because there are always good things and bad things in life. If you focus on the shadow, you see darkness. If you focus on the sunny side, you see brightness. Really, this is such a simple thing, but then it takes that long to really get into your system. Every time in a situation, you automatically will think there are 2 sides of it, and you focus on the good side of it. Then the side product of this practice is because I wrote so much,
right.
And I started writing short stories, got them published, and then started writing
So
novels.
were your short stories also positive for the most part?
Oh yeah,
Uplifting?
love stories.
Love stories. Oh, I see. So when you get outside of the book even, as an inspirational person, you have a story to tell about a very challenged, shy foreigner who walked herself through her life for 2 years to become a positive, engaged, interactive writer.
Yes.
Correct?
It's 2 years I switched this mindset.
Right.
But the writing part took even longer. From the beginning, I started writing short stories to this book published. That's 15 years.
Okay, so
it's a long time. It's not just
so you've spent the better part of 20 years working your way through this process.
Yes.
But you're not the same person you were.
No, I'm very, very happy I'm not that old person anymore.
So when did you take the pilot training?
So after that 2 years of positive thinking, I wrote down a list of things I wanted to do. It didn't include being a pilot but including basic things to be open and warm and adventurous. And then I always wanted to dance, but I was so shy, I didn't even tell my parents. So that's one thing I wanted to do. I love nature, so I wanted to hike and see the nature. I love travel, I want to see the world. Being a pilot was much later than that. After I did those things, and I said, what can I do next? Because I was so afraid of height. I said, well, this is another fear. I want to challenge myself. I want to overcome this fear. So I started taking pilot flying lessons, and eventually a year later I got my private pilot license.
So you were a licensed pilot?
Yes.
You're not current now?
I don't fly anymore, but the experience itself is just amazing. You can tell I'm so happy just thinking about that experience. It's just because it's so expensive I stopped flying.
Yeah, you have to have a use for a plane just about to fly a plane.
Right.
I know that as a pilot as well.
But because of that, I have special feelings for pilots.
Right.
Especially fighter pilots, because I know how hard it is to fly. But just to think about how they can fly and fight at the same time, it's very hard to imagine how they did it.
But you also had a sense from having been a pilot of what it would have taken for the plane to have problems, what it would have taken for a person to think about whether you should bail out of the plane or not, what are the mechanics of the plane. Right, so it's another piece in your story, right?
Yes.
You don't have a Chinese woman flying in here. I'm just teasing you.
Okay. No, at the time I doubt that could be.
All right, so let's get deeper into the writing, right? So you wrote words, phrases, paragraphs, short stories. When did you say, all right, I can write a book?
After several short stories got published, I was like, okay, now it's time to do a novel. But I did 20% of a novel. and I stopped because it was so hard. It's really takes a lot of time and energy and to trying to figure out everything. I stopped.
Okay.
It took me another maybe 8 to 10 years before I pick up again. But it wasn't wasted time because during that time I had all those experience.
Right.
And that for my first book, not this published book. Before this published book, I wrote another book. It's about transformation of a fearful young girl to a woman. Open.
The story we've just talked about.
Yeah, I used a lot of my own experience during that time.
Sure.
And the reason I picked it up actually is because I told you my father was dying of cancer, so I went back to China taking care of him and then stayed for my mom. And that experience, after 3 years, it was really tough. It was the toughest thing I've ever done to taking care of your parents.
Your dying parents, yeah.
Right. When I came back, I said, really, I understand now. Life is too short. I have to do something I love to do, and I love to see the world. I love hike. I love nature. I love to write. So I have to do it. That's how I picked it up. I finished that one first. It's not good enough to be published, but helped me to be a better writer.
Right.
And this is my second book, but first published book.
So tell me, when you were raised as a young woman, you were raised in communist China.
Yes.
You thought we were the devil, right?
Yes, that's what we were told. Well, America was hell. Americans were devils. And American soldiers were labeled as cruel and coward.
Really?
Yeah, that's the story we heard.
So we were even worse than the Japanese.
Oh, yeah. Well, equivalent. Equivalent. It used the same word, devils.
Really?
Yeah. 日本鬼子 means Japanese devils.
These horrible people, I mean, obviously they're not, but the horrible people that were soldiers, Japanese soldiers that killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Chinese, were the equivalent of those cowardly, nasty devil Americans, right?
Yeah.
And you still
日本
came
鬼
here.
子，美国鬼子。日本 means Japanese devils. 美国鬼子 means American devils.
Okay.
So you're
right in there
you're
with them.
equivalent.
All right. So when you were accepted to come to the United States, what did you expect to find? A bunch
Study
of
science. That's all.
But what about the cowardly devils that were here?
That's part of the things we're supposed to, not to learn, not to really to deal. We're here to learn science and bring the advanced science back home.
So you were supposed to compartmentalize, not Americanize at all.
No. I was shocked actually when people smiled to me like in the streets and say hello to me. I'm like, nobody said hello to me. No strangers said hello to me before.
What kind of devils are these guys?
Right. Yeah.
So
Pleasantly surprised.
So what changed? So that changed your mind?
Yeah.
Did you have friends where you were working on your PhD? Did you develop friendships with Americans?
In the same laboratory, yes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I didn't really venture very far.
Okay.
I was too shy to be friendly. Actually, that's another thing on my list of things to do. I wanted to learn to make friends. I was just so shy. I had no ability.
So that was true even in China? You were a very shy person in China? Wasn't just the cultural?
No, from very young age, I was just that way.
So you began to get some kind of a positive feeling about Americans. Mm-hmm. When did the flying tigers fly into your life?
That's much later.
Much later.
I heard about it, but if you don't really get into the story itself, you won't know the amazing part of it, the fascinating part of it. Yeah, we heard about it. I thought, like most people, there were maybe a big group of people did a huge things for China. No, it's just a small group of people. That's what amazes me.
Yeah. Well, when you think about, what is it, the Salween River?
Salween Gorge, yes, River Gorge.
You have made that part of your story.
Yes.
And I didn't know the story.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, I had to go look, right? Both because I was fascinated by the flying tigers, but also because I wanted to know,
is it true?
Is it true? How does it fit into the story? You know, what did you borrow from the story? So tell that story, will you? Tell it in your own words. Well, let's not talk about the book. Tell about the Salween Gorge story.
Well, it's a gorge in Yunnan province. It's part of the path called Burman Road.
Okay.
This is a really important road for a while to transfer the Chinese, like for the Chinese to have supplies from outside world.
Right.
But of course, the Japanese destroyed most of it. And by that time, the Japanese wanted to cross this river to come closer to Kunming, the capital of the Yunnan province, and then from there they could just go to the capital of China, Chongqing. So it's a really important path. The Chinese soldiers, armies, destroyed the bridge so that the Japanese couldn't cross this gorge, this river. Well, the Japanese started building a bridge, and just like the pilot in the story, you have to tell like what kind of gorge. It's a really tall gorge like this, and there are roads like this waving 30 miles down to the bottom of the gorge. So the Japanese were packed on this waving 30-mile long road.
So there's thousands and thousands of Japanese tanks, artillery, huge
packed,
guns, infantry, the whole
waiting for the engineer to rebuild the bridge so they could cross and then to destroy the China.
The whole south
part of China. Right. Well, the flying tigers flew to that gorge and just bombed the hell out of those.
Well, this is the piloting of this. If you remember the Star Wars, where it is find the Force, Luke, and he's weaving through, and he's using his mind to follow this narrow little spot and find this perfect place. There are 4 airplanes with 30 or 50 or 100,000 Japanese.
Right. 8 airplanes went to the place, but 4 was like top cover.
Oh, okay.
4 did the bombing. But they destroyed the road, so the whole road was like the waving, going down treacherous road to the bottom of the gorge was all destroyed. So the Japanese had nowhere to go.
They couldn't get in or out.
Yeah.
And they couldn't cross.
No.
And they were no longer a force. So these guys with these little tiny fighter planes, 4 tiny little fighter planes, and 4 guys backing them up, trying to keep 30 or 40 or 100 Japanese planes from taking them out. 4 little airplanes did the Luke Skywalker thing in the bottom of this mile-deep gorge. Narrow, scary, windy, mile-deep gorge with strapped-on handmade attachments, bomb racks, and came in there and bombed this and totally destroyed the Japanese army for days.
Yeah, they went back and forth, and for days they destroyed the whole, I think it's a regiment, right? The whole...
Yeah, tens of thousands of Japanese. Yeah, I think it was. And in the process, the Japanese never crossed the river, right?
Never.
Yeah, so there were 3 more years of this war. And this one little tiny bunch of 8 pilots managed to deter an entire division and all of the Japanese from swarming into the south side of China.
Because their army was so much stronger than the Chinese army at the time.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Chinese army was almost defeated by them. They had a very small part of left. If they crossed the bridge,
it was all over.
It's very hard for the Chinese to defend itself.
So the Chinese in this kind of setting had small firearms. What, horses? Wagons, artillery.
Yeah, they had.
But no tanks, no, and no Air Force.
Air Force. At the beginning, they had an Air Force, but say at the time, 1937, when Japanese attacked Shanghai, right before Nanking, Japanese had 3,000 aircraft. China only has 300.
Yeah.
By then, by the Seething Gorge, the Chinese Air Force
dozens of airplanes is all.
Yeah, non-functional almost.
Yeah. And no capacity to replace them either.
No.
No industrial structure to replace them. So this was hanging by a thread. I mean, when you talk about
literally.
yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. It's an amazing story.
It is.
I mean, even as a writer, you could not have written 8 pilots saving southern China.
No. People always say, hey,
you're a little too far-fetched there, Iris.
Right.
Stay with the facts.
It's true. You checked it, right?
Oh, yeah, I did. It is true. Yeah, so there are 60 or 80 pilots, and there are 21, I think, ace pilots. That is, people that shot down 5 or more planes. Mm-hmm. I think the most successful guy shot down 13 or 15 planes.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about amazing pilots against almost insurmountable odds. Always outnumbered. Mm-hmm. 2 to 5 to 10 to 1. Mm-hmm. And they still survived.
Survived first and then won.
And won. Yeah, virtually always won.
Yeah.
It was amazing stuff. Yeah, it didn't happen anywhere else in the world.
The first victory was in December 13th, 1941, only 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor attack. 10 Japanese bombers showed up to bomb Kunming, the capital of Yunnan province. They had done this for years without much trouble, but on that day, 10 bombers showed up. Only 1 made it home.
Really?
Yeah, to tell the Japanese leaders that American pilots were in China.
Watch out.
Yeah.
Well, and part of your story is a follow-up. Mm-hmm. As part of the story is that obviously these Japanese wanted access to this American downed pilot. They knew he'd been downed, and they wanted access to him.
They would do anything to get him. They would kill everybody along the way.
And that's very historically accurate in process, right?
Actually, the story was inspired by a fact, historical fact. There was an wounded American pilot came back to the U.S. and at a press conference, he told the people, he named the village in order to thank the Chinese people for saving him. But the Japanese spies in the U.S. pick up the information and send troops in China to retaliate.
And so they killed everybody in that community.
Everyone, men, women, children were all killed. So that's
for having even helped him. Yeah.
Yes.
It's amazing stuff. Well, Iris, where do you find this book?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, even Walmart carries it now. So
online,
online, and other bookstores. You can ask a library to order one if you want to.
Okay. So it's called Wings of a Flying Tiger, and it's written by Iris Young, and it has been an absolutely delightful interview. But more than that, it was a delightful read. And the sharing of two peoples in the most trying and challenging of times, in real historical setting, people who engaged each other in the survival of a people, is amazing stuff. And I think the book powerfully gives us that feel, that sense, Iris. So thank you for sharing.
Sure.
It was beautiful stuff.
Thank you. It shows how the Americans helped Chinese to win the war, and also shows how much the Chinese appreciate their generosity and help. There was a great relationship between the two countries.
Yeah, during that time, there certainly was.
A Chinese American, this is the perfect topic for me.
So, in closing this, in your trips as recently as 5 years ago, is there any different sense of Americans in the Chinese culture? Are we still the devils?
Oh, if you are, I'm one of it.
Yeah, all right.
I'm American.
You are an American citizen, and that's delightful. So, what are your compatriots, your Chinese compatriots say? Is it any different than it was when you grew up?
The culture is different now because China
Yeah.
is a much more open country. They know the truth. Not everyone, but it's started to.
So there are
know,
people that
yeah.
that are not surprised that you haven't been chewed up by these awful, terrible.
No.
Yeah, okay.
This is totally China is it's a very open country now.
So even in rural areas of China, that you find people that are culturally appreciative of Western culture.
I cannot say about
Okay.
the area.
Okay.
But in the cities, because
Yeah.
if you go to China now, it's so modern. They have all kinds of things we have here, like even fast food restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
They're everywhere, and big departmental stores everywhere. So yeah, China is a modernized.
So we may be the
country.
devils now, but it's the it's the
It's
McDonald's devils, right? All right, Iris. Thank you so much. It's been
thank you.
delightful.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
And it is Wings of a Flying Tiger by Iris Young.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching.